Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. How y'all doing? Good, good. Well, y'all in for a treat today. All right, I'm Dr. Daryl Bryce. I teach in the sociology department here, and y'all cut that out. Stop. More. Nah, it is a great pleasure to introduce a great friend of mine, Dr. Derek Brooms. He's associate professor at the University of Louisville. He has an upcoming book titled
Being Black, Being Male on Campus, Understanding and Confronting Black Male Collegiate Experiences.
Look for it. All right. It's gonna be good. I said, man, did you have anything you want me to read? He was like, no. So, without further ado, please give Dr. Brooms a warm highline welcome.
Good afternoon. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for having me out. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you all. And so what I'm going to be doing is just trying to share some information with you to really kind of put a spotlight on the heartbeat of the civil rights movement. So as Dr. Bryce mentioned, we went to graduate school together, so I actually consider him a brother. And so when he asked me about an introduction, I don't really, it's not about me today. I'm just the conduit in which the information is going to hopefully flow to you. And so what I'm really going to do and ask you is to really invite your listening ears and your learning ears, and I hope that we can engage in some conversation at the end of this. And so this is very much something that I'm like super excited about to talk about, and I'm trying to hold back some of that energy so I don't get too fast for you all too early on. So when I teach, I always tell my students that if you're going to work with me, you got to have on running shoes. Right? Don't let the shoes confuse you, because if you ever seen Dr. King at a march, like he had on steppers, but he walked like 100 miles, right? And so I want to share with you all women of the civil rights movement, and so this title that I'm sharing with you today is intentional, and is intended to really amplify the ways in which women gave birth to, carried, nurtured, and brought forward the civil rights movement, right? And so we obviously know that there are some male-dominated figures that we always hear about, like Dr. King, we hear about Roy Wilkins and others, but this afternoon, we're talking about women, right? And we're gonna put this within a theoretical perspective. You all ready? Yeah. Y'all ready? Yeah. All right, because I was like ready this morning, so I just had to wait. All right, so. So I wanted to start off, and I don't know if this is actually going to work. We'll try and see if it's going to work for me. I'm going to start you off with some Nina Simone, right? Because we're talking about like mothering. We got to bring our whole selves kind of where we are.
Trouble in mind, I'm blue, but I won't be blue always, 'cause the sun's gonna shine in my back door someday. Trouble in mind, I'm slow. My poor heart is beating so slow. I never had so much trouble in my life before. Yeah. I'm going down to the river. Gonna get me a rocking chair. If the Lord don't help me, I'm gonna rock away from him. Trouble in mind, I'm blue, but I won't be blue always, 'cause the sun's gonna shine in my back door someday. Trouble in mind, but I'm blue, yeah.
All right, hopefully you caught that. This song is called Trouble in My Mind, and right at the end of it, if you know anything about some of the freedom songs that were sang during the civil rights movement, she made reference to the sun is gonna shine in my back door at some time, right? And so it kind of harkens in and connects to the song, This Little Light of Mine, if you've ever heard that song. There's also a song that women used to galvanize the movement, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. And so I wanted to start off today not only with some song, and I really appreciated that Doris and the committee had some songs playing before, but I really wanted to start off my presentation with song so that you can get women's voices right at the beginning, right at the beginning. And so if you know anything about Nina Simone, she was a prolific singer, songwriter, and activist. And then in the kind of second part of her career, she turned directly to Black freedom, to really use her standing and her status as an opportunity and a platform to really speak about those troubles. And so the name of this album is Trouble in My Mind, and that's obviously the title track on that album. There's also a song on here called Mississippi Goddamn. If you know anything about that song, this is in response to the killings that continue to happen in Mississippi. There's also a song in here on this album called Strange Fruit, right? A remake of Billie Holiday's song. And so if you really want to know what was going on in the movement, then I suggest to you that we got to think about this a bit differently. So what I have in front of you is this notion of mothering the movement. And we're in a historical time period right now with regards to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And so these three women that we have in front of you, very often once we start thinking about what's going on, we might hear about Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Freddie Gray, Rika Boyd, the list goes on and on and on. And we hear about Black Lives Matter movement, we hear about the activists, and we hear them in response primarily to the killing of black men and boys. But at the heart of this movement, right, are three women, three black queer women whose names are not very often told, not often announced, but they are at the heartbeat that responded to Trayvon Martin getting killed because he was racially profiled in Sanford, Florida. And so they started this because they didn't want another black boy or black girl, black man or black woman, or anybody else for that matter, right? Because of race, because of sexuality, because of religion, in efforts to maybe make America great again, right? Threaten the physical life and the vitality of others, right? So if you got a problem with like being comfortable, this is not really the space for you, because I'm gonna say some things today and I'm hoping I'm gonna say them to make you a little bit uncomfortable, because it's not until we get uncomfortable and experience some discomfort that we get moved to action, right? And so I wanna talk to you about some folks today, right? I'm gonna situate this in black feminist thought, and so I wanted to use a couple of points here to really kind of talk to you about what that is. This is coming from Patricia Hill Collins. She's a sociologist at the University of Maryland. And here, primarily what you're looking at is this notion of the specialized knowledge or situated knowledge that comes from the standpoint of black women, right? And I think about Audre Lorde when I think about Patricia Hill Collins. Audre Lorde said if we don't define ourselves for ourselves, we will be consumed by other people's fantasies and crushed, right? And so what Patricia Hill Collins is theorizing is that the only way you're gonna understand what's happening to black women and what it means to face these triple oppression of race, class, and gender is to talk to black women and learn from black women, right? And so this is what Patricia Hill Collins is theorizing. And what she profoundly argues is that women, black women in particular, are powerful agents of knowledge. You want to know what's going on in somebody's house, who do you ask? You ask the mother, right? We want the daddy to be there, the father to be there, but primarily when we think about it, I'm not saying this happens all the time, this is not an overgeneralized statement, but what I'm saying is that women are the carriers of knowledge, right? And what she thought was that the basic premise of black feminist thought is that both the changed consciousness of individuals and the social transformation of political and economic institutions are what we need to create change. And what she argued is that we had to bring voices from the margins back to the center so that we can hear some truth, right? So today I'm gonna bring you a little bit of truth, right? And hope you're ready for it. So if we're talking about like black feminist thought, then we gotta talk about Sojourner Truth. Right? If we're talking about like mothering the movement of the 20th century, then we gotta understand how movements started well before the 20th century. And so Sojourner Truth is just, I'm gonna give you the big three. I'm gonna hit you with three folks, and then we're gonna really get into it. So this is from her speech that she gave in Ohio in 1851. In fact, she toured from 1851 to 1853. She's the first black woman to ever tour, given a speaking tour. And so here, this is a kind of midway through her speech. She's talking about all these ways in which she has been diminished and denigrated because she's a woman, and primarily is through physical prowess. And so she's kind of responding to these male privileged sexist ways of thinking about women as if they can't do for themselves. And so she says, the man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody ever, she didn't say like, sometimes, most of the time, like ain't nobody helping me, right? But at the end of that, ain't I a woman, right? Look at me, look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered in the barns, and no man could head me, right? She's basically saying no man could outwork me in the field, right? And ain't I a woman? And what she's really kind of pushing at, and what she's really inviting us to do, is understand the intersectionality of race and gender, right? Just because someone is a woman or identifies as a woman, again, we can go through other social identities, that doesn't mean that I'm less capable than, right? And so this is really what she's kind of getting to us. Second, Harriet Tubman, right? Needs no introduction, Moses of her people, right? Went back into Maryland somewhere between 13 and 17 times to help free folks, right? Freedom fighter, abolitionist, humanitarian. I like the second quote here. She says, I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. Right? So you start telling me what women can't do, I just can't hear you too much, right? And this is like 19th century. Like this is like, while we still in bondage. And this is Ida B. Wells Barnett, the third kind of the big three that I mentioned here. And all three of these women were born into slavery, right? They were born into slavery. And so just a bit of a semantics here, they were never slaves, but they were enslaved. They were enslaved because of a system that allowed for oppressing people based on their racial identity. And just for the record, the status of children got determined by not men, but the women, primarily because of raping of black women. And so those slave masters who were too poor to have a whole bunch of slaves, they would basically rape black women so that they could procreate other slaves. Right? And so women bore the brunt of the physical and emotional challenges during this era. And so, I can't say enough about Ida B. Wells Barnett. She deserves her own presentation, but she was the co-founder of the NAACP, so most of the time we hear about the NAACP, we hear about Dr. Du Bois, and I love Dr. Du Bois, but he wasn't there by himself, right? So Ida B. Wells Barnett owned that. She also founded her own newspaper, and she was the editor of it. She was an anti-lynching activist. She was a women's rights activist. She was a human rights activist. She was a feminist. She was a sociologist. And again, here, pointing to this last quote, I'd rather go down in history as one lone Negro who dared to tell the government that it had done a dastardly thing than to save my skin by taking back what I said. We live in a time period where people would rather save their own back than speak truth. Because I'm so worried about what other folks might think about me. But as we heard from Luis this morning in the presentation that he gave, right? If one of us ain't free, all of us ain't free, right? And so we have to understand our linked yoke. All right, so mother in the movement. And so I've kind of transitioned from the big three to the big four. Like, it can keep on going. But I'm trying to make it representational and fit as many people on the screen at once. And so here's a quote by Dorothy Cotton. Though women may not have gotten the recognition, they endured the same discrimination and violence as men. And so one of the prominent narratives that carried itself out during the civil rights movement was that women weren't on the front line because men feared that they wouldn't be able to take the physical abuse. All right? And so part of what I want to do today is just kind of dispel some of that myth. Right? Women were on the front line, they were on the middle line, and they were on the back line. They were the line. Right? So whatever it was that men were able to do is because it was because women privileged them. Because one of the things that women understood is that you don't have to be in front in order to lead. Too many people get caught up in where you're standing and not the work that you're actually doing. Right? So don't get confused about where you're standing, and you got to make sure that there's some congruency that your work is actually lining up with what it is. So I've got 4 women here. On the left, we have Dorothy Height. Second, we have Septima Clark. Third, we have Amelia Boynton. And fourth, we have Ella Baker. I'm going to reintroduce those ladies to you a little bit, those women to you a little bit later. But I wanted to spotlight them, and these could be considered very easily as the mothers right, of the civil rights movement. So when we start thinking about Rosa Parks, for instance, she studied at the Highlander School, which is where Septima Clark taught, right? So we know of Rosa Parks because of the teachings that she had at the Highlander School in the 1940s. All right, so mother in the movement here, black feminist thought, black mothering as a means of protest, black actors mothering, and then other mothering. And so I'm going to walk you through these concepts. I'll talk to you about these folks. There's a web link there. I should have put it at the end, but we're going to keep on going. So 6 of the most important roles that were identified by civil rights activists, right? So these are, Dr. Barnett did some interviews with civil rights activists, and she asked them, can you identify what 6 of the most well, she didn't say 6. Can you identify what are some of the most important leadership roles? And based on her data collection, it came down to these 6: articulate, express concern and needs for followers, define and set goals, provide an ideology, justify an action, formulate tactics and strategies, initiate action, mobilize and persuade followers, right? And so the women that I'm going to be talking to you about are going to encompass all 6 of those. So here's the first, Dorothy Height. Originally trained as a social worker, president of the National Council of Negro Women from 1957 to 1997. Right? She was executive of the Young Women's Christian Association, chief organizer of the 1963 March on Washington. So if you go and look in the history books, if you look at the original drafts of the March on Washington, they didn't even mention women in there. The only thing they had was an opportunity for Mahalia Jackson to sing. Right? So even though women were at the front line in organizing the movement, they had been sidelined by male privilege because all the men wanted to get up and speak. Right? And so again, just because you're talking a whole lot don't mean you said a whole lot. Right? And so Dorothy Height is at the start of that. Here you see at the bottom with Gloria Steinem, Shirley Chisholm, Betty Friedan, and others, she helped found the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. And so what she's doing, if you'll just take a look at this, is she's creating institutions in order to put things in place so that the work could carry out whether she was there or not. Right? So one of the things that you do in mothering is you try to put some mechanisms in place so that even when you're not around, your kids can still develop, grow, and be healthy. And so when I think about the ways in which people like Dorothy Height mothered the movement, she was instrumental in putting things in place so that other people can not only join her, but carry out the work as well. Here's Miss Septima Clark. You'll see the top, known as the Queen Godmother of the Civil Rights Movement. And this distinction is important because many people say that Rosa Parks was the mother of the Civil Rights Movement. Well, if we look at what Ms. Parks is most known for, that was 1955, and clearly there were some things going on well before 1955. So I mentioned earlier, she studied at Highlander School under Septima Clark. One of the things that Septima Clark did was that she understood that if you're going to get people to action, you got to get them to activate in their own lives. And so what she did was she created adult learning classes so that she could teach people how to read and write, because regardless of how important voting is, if I can't read and write, I wouldn't even understand the laws they put in front of me anyway. And so she taught adult literacy classes, which was critically important in places like Mississippi that if you want to create change on your institution, don't go and ask somebody else, why don't you just get engaged in it? I'm a faculty member. I have a privileged position. At the end of the day, I'm highly replaceable. Schools ain't pushing students out. If you don't like what's happening at your school, it's up to you. Got to be the change you want to see. Constance Baker Motley, you can see here, served as chief judge to the U.S. District Court of Southern District of New York. She was the first black woman appointed as a federal judge. Right? How many people ever heard of Constance Baker Motley? Right? These are people in our history, kind of like that Hidden Figures movie. Right? One of the running things they used to tell us is that if you wanted to ever hide something from black folks, in particular, you just put it in between books because they'll never read it. I'm going to refer to something I said earlier, don't let school interfere with your education. Right? As Dead Prez said, they schools ain't teaching us shit. Right? Okay? So here she is, Ms. Motley, first black woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court. Right? When we think about Supreme Court, we're thinking about like Thurgood Marshall, then there's Clarence Thomas. We're just gonna leave that there, don't worry about that, right? We're not gonna talk about that, right? I'm not saying they're the two the same people, but Constance Baker Motley also represented James Meredith, right? So we hear about James Meredith. There's two things you might hear about James Meredith. Number one is he led the March Against Fear, right? Going from Memphis to Jackson, Mississippi. He got shot during that march. And then also he integrated University of Mississippi. Well, what we don't know is that in order to help him integrate, it was not only Thurgood Marshall who served as one of his judges, it was also Constance Baker Motley. Right? So we got to understand who are our architects. Right? Brown versus Board of Education, very few people know that Brown, the name Brown, is Linda Brown. Her father, Oliver Brown, brought a lawsuit against Topeka, Kansas, because the school that she went to was 3 miles away from her house, the segregated school, and there was a white school that was 4 blocks away, right? And instead of having his daughter walk to school 3 miles and back from school 3 miles, he said, there's a very able school right near my home. I'm gonna fight so my daughter can go to school there. Right? So we started thinking about this Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954 is named after Linda Brown. And most of us, we have no idea who she is. Joanne Robinson. Joanne Robinson got kicked off of a bus, physically kicked off of a bus, assaulted, removed, physically abused on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1949. After she was arrested, she decreed that I don't want this to ever happen to another black woman in this city. So 6 years later, when we get to Rosa Parks, right, I want you to understand something. Rosa Parks got arrested on a Friday. The Montgomery bus boycott started on Monday. I'm not talking about Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. What I'm saying is that people had to already be ready, right? That's what I tell students, don't get ready, be ready. You're gonna miss the opportunity because you ain't ready yet, right? So she started the Women's Political Council, late 1949, 1950, to activate women in Montgomery, Alabama so that they can engage in protesting against harmful conditions, not only to women, but to black communities as well, right? She was an active board member of the Montgomery Improvement Association, the MIA, which was the lead arm of the Montgomery bus boycott, right? I'll speak a little bit more about that in a few moments. Here's Claudette Colvin. She was 15 years old when she was physically assaulted and removed from a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And the NAACP thought, you know what, we could use her. This is 1955. So there was actually 4 women who were physically abused on buses in 1955 in Alabama, and Claudine Colvin was one of those folks. And what she said was that the NAACP said, but maybe we can use Ms. Colvin as this person that can bring this court case so we can get rid of this segregation on the buses in Montgomery, Alabama. But the rumor was that she was pregnant and she wasn't married. Did y'all hear me mention respectability politics before that? Right? So the NAACP said, nah, she don't have the right kind of status for us to bring that court case, because it would look bad on us if she was pregnant without being married. Right? so we don't really get to hear her name. Mary Louise Smith, she was physically assaulted on a bus in October 1955. And again, the NAACP did not take up her court case or want to move forward in trying to desegregate the buses in Montgomery because there was a rumor in town that her father was a drunkard. Right? So again, we're privileging a particular type of lifestyle over the definitive needs of people at the time. And so here you can see she was jailed and charged with failure to follow segregation laws. She was a key plaintiff in the Browder versus Gale court case, which is the one that actually ended segregation on Montgomery buses. And just as a point of reference, Rosa Parks was not a named defendant in that court case. So the court case that actually ended segregation in Montgomery was named after Aurelia Browder, right? Browder versus Gale. And when we think about the Montgomery bus boycott, we always attribute it to Rosa Parks, but I'm just want to point out to you, there were some things happening before we got to Miss Rosa Parks, right? But here's a couple of things we also need to know. She was a field secretary in the 1940s. In fact, her job as a field secretary in Alabama was to go and investigate domestic violence against women in the rural parts of Alabama. So well before she came and said that, or you heard, right? She didn't say that. You heard that she was too tired to get up. And as you can see, the quote is, the only thing she was tired of doing was giving up or giving in to oppression, to segregation, to demonization, to denigration, et cetera. Right? She's a field secretary. In the 1940s, she studied at the Highlander School, learned about nonviolent tactics, trained in civil disobedience. So that in December, when the NAACP was looking for somebody, she said, I'll do it. She wasn't, and I use this picture intentionally because the image we get very often with Rosa Parks is that she was a tired old lady. Did she look old in this picture to y'all? No. She wasn't tired. She wasn't old, right? But as Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Right? And so the Montgomery bus boycott lasted for 381 days. Right? A rhetorical question, I'm not asking you to answer to me. What are you committed to doing for 381 days consecutively? And waking up is not one of those because you don't really control that. Right? So what are you committed to doing in terms of standing for what you believe in for 381 consecutive days? 93% of the black population in Montgomery participated in this bus boycott. And the reason why they ended it was not because the Montgomery City Council thought that it was the right thing to do. It was because their bus company was about to fold. Wasn't nobody else riding the bus. And in fact, one of the things that they did, they said that they encouraged black folks, so they encouraged black folks to either carpool or even walk to work if you had to. The city of Montgomery passed a law that outlawed carpooling. We don't want you to ride together, right? So there were people who would just use their cars as taxis and just say, I'll pick you up, take you, drop you off, come get the next. So no, you can't do that. It's illegal. I just want you to understand how the system worked. Right? They made it illegal to carpool. Joanne Robinson, who was the woman I showed 4 slides ago, her husband owned a printing press. So when Rosa Parks got arrested on that Friday, they stayed at their office all day on Friday and Saturday, and then on Sunday they went to churches and passed out the leaflets that said, on Monday, December 1st, 1955, we will not ride the bus. You want to create change, you start with yourself. You start with a commitment. And you say, I don't care how cold it is, I don't care how long it is, I don't care if I got a bike. How many of y'all are willing to take the bus to school, right? You know, we can just ask those kind of questions, right? And so this is what Rosa Parks was committed to. And I had the privilege and the honor, actually, to have her great niece in my class 3 years ago. And so when we started talking about these are not stories, these are people, these are folks who came before us. And so if I stand tall, it's because I stand on the shoulders of those mothers, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, fathers who came before me, right? And the reason why I can be indefatigable, I don't get tired. That's just a fancy word, I just wanted to use it, right? I like that word. Say it again. The reason I can be indefatigable is because of the people who have come before me. right? The people who have come before me. So if folks can commit to 381 days because they were being wronged and abused on a daily basis, where you pay the same fare to get on a bus and folks said you can't sit in the front, right? Then you got to make some change. And just to kind of put this all in perspective, right? Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to sue transportation system. Ida B. Wells Barnett sued a train company 71 years before Rosa Parks. Right? So this ain't even nothing, Rosa Parks ain't even doing nothing new. Right? But she's learning from the lessons of the folks who come before her. Right? One of our greatest weapons. Daisy Bates, she's the president of the Arkansas State Conference of the NAACP. Her home was ground zero for the Little Rock Nine. Right? So you know the Little Rock Nine, the 9 students who integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, they used her house as the home base all throughout that summer once the parents had made decisions that these were their students or their young people, their children were going to integrate the school. Daisy Bates' home became the headquarters for that. And so she was instrumental not only in bringing those young people together, but also teaching them the different tactics and the ways that they had to steel themselves to be ready for the verbal harassment that they were going to face, for the physical intimidation that they were going to face. And so she was a key figure in this. So we started talking about people of the Little Rock Nine, then we have to understand that Daisy Bates was a key architect of that. Here's a picture of Elizabeth Eckford. She was one of the students of the Little Rock Nine. She did not have a home phone. On the first day of school, because there were threats of bombs at the school that the black students were going to get killed, they all called around and said, we're not going to go just for fear of safety. We don't know if we don't know if the police going to protect us. We don't know if folks going to get on us as soon as we get out there. But Ms. Eckford didn't have a phone, so she never got that phone call. So this picture that you see with, and you can do your own kind of media analysis here, the friendly folks in the back, right? Pun intended, right? She was the only black student at school that day. Right? And so this is her, you can't really see it, she's actually walking in the street, and she is surrounded by folks who have basically created a mob-like atmosphere around her. And all of the students were instructed to wear sunglasses so that folks could have less opportunity to intimidate them by trying to see if there was any fear in their eyes. Right? And so I'll just ask you, right? Regardless of how you identify, how would you like to be one of the only, or be the only, in a place where you going in, you knew people didn't want you to be there? Would you still go? And like they say, which side are you on, right? Ruby Bridges, right? So you think about going somewhere where some people didn't want you. Imagine being 6 years old and being the only black student in the school. So this is Ruby Bridges, famous picture by Norm Rockwell to show the federal marshals who were used to escort Ruby Bridges to school each day, right? Because she faced physical violence and intimidation, right? And so even though I've titled this Mothering and Even Women of the Civil Rights Movement, this also extends, again, it's Linda Brown, this also extends to young girls as well, right? So there are ways in which our youth can teach us very valuable lessons about moving forward. Many of the teachers refuse to teach her. Not like they didn't feel like it, not like they weren't good teachers. I'm not teaching you. Right? And this is what she endured in order to move forward with her education. And again, this coupled with what her parents did helped her move forward in this, right? A few more here. Here's Vivian Malone Jones. If you remember the great segregationist, Governor Wallace, standing in the doorway, right? A la Bill Connor, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Right? And what they instructed, they told Vivian Malone Jones that she could, because they had passed a law that higher education had been desegregated. They said, you can come through the back door. She said, no, I earned the right just like everybody else. I'm coming through the front door. Right? You're going to know when I'm there, right? So here's her quote. I didn't feel like I should sneak in. I didn't feel like I should go around the back door. I don't care who was standing in the door. I had every right in the world to face him and to go to school. Right? So again, that notion of that song, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. We understand, right, in the times that we're in today, and this has been prevalent throughout our whole history of this American project, that we're gonna face obstacles, challenges. But the question is not whether or not we're gonna face challenges, the question is how we respond to those. Right? You can see here she worked in the U.S. Justice Department, 1996 she retired. Right? So we're talking about being very active here. Diane Nash was 19 when she joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. If you've ever seen the film Freedom Riders, right? She was instrumental in organizing, so the first bus that was traveling, so basically SNCC wanted to challenge the segregation laws on interstate travel on Greyhound buses, and they amassed an integrated team, both black and white students, and they were gonna travel from the DC area all the way down to Louisiana. Right? So they're going to go through Memphis, go down to Jackson, Mississippi, and then from there they're going to go down to New Orleans. And on the way in Anniston, Alabama, the first bus gets bombed. Right? You might have seen that. If you go to museums, you see these pictures. And everyone was worried because if the bus didn't continue, or if the plan didn't continue to take this bus, then it would basically be like they won. And so Diane Nash, who was a student at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, organized a second bus so that they can keep on going, right? She's from Chicago too, just want to point that out. Anyway, I'm from Chicago, gotta shout that out, right? Served on a committee that passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? She's very engaged in what was going on. Became a staff person, organizer, strategist. I mean, she actually, just up until maybe 3 or 4 years ago, was still actually engaged in speaking and teaching young people about the power of their agency. Dorothy Cotton, directed the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She was the highest ranking woman in the SCLC. So this is Ralph Abernathy, Martin Luther King, and others, these black men, church pastors, who had basically excluded women and sidelined them as if they were not integral parts to what was going on, right? So Dorothy Cotton was the highest ranking woman in that. She ran the citizenship education program. She was the regional director for action and served as director of student activity at Cornell University for 10 years, right? And again, I love the quote. I'm tired of people saying, and now we present her who marched with Dr. King. Well, a lot of folks flew down there and marched. I helped organize it, right? Don't be confused on what I did. Right? But again, even as we think about the narratives that not only surround women, we also know that they drown women out. Right? And so we have to be very mindful of who's writing the story and what their agenda is in writing that story. Because there are many instances in which people will privilege their own forms of agency or lack of agency, but they'll put themselves forward and diminish and push other people back. Dory and Joyce Ladner, interesting story. These sisters were students at Jackson State University, and so this is like the beautiful part of history like that we have to study and understand. So they both attended Jackson State University, and so folks who know, this is a historically black college in Jackson, Mississippi, one of 3 public higher education institutions that are HBCU or have HBCU designation in Mississippi. There's a couple of other private ones. So there was these students who were the Tougaloo Nine, that they were students who were at Tougaloo College, which is about 10 minutes away from Jackson State, and they wanted to integrate the library in Jackson, Mississippi. And Dory and Joyce Ladner said, well, we want to support them. The president and the board of trustees at Jackson State University prohibited any students from participating in civil rights activities. I want to make sure you heard that. This is a HBCU, historically black college, and they said you can't go and participate in any of these things that are going to help bring you some freedom. And if you do, you might face expulsion. So Dory and Joyce Ladner said, yeah, okay. Thanks for letting us know which side you on, right? They went and participated anyway, and then they transferred to Tougaloo. Because if you're not going to support me, right, I don't need to be here, right? And so we have to understand that everybody that's your kinfolk ain't your kinfolk. Okay. So they helped start the Youth NAACP. One of the founders of COFO in Clarksdale, Mississippi, Joyce Ladner, is a sociology professor. One of her most famous books is called The Death of White Sociology. And basically what she was saying is that if you read the traditional, and if you're in Dr. Bright's class, you'll get this day one. One of the things that's criminal in the teaching profession is that we always and continue to study DWMs, right? Dead white men, right? As if they were the only important people in our history. So her book, Death of White Sociology, is contributing to our understanding that we've got to blow the lid off the ways in which we were previously trained so that we can make some space for some education. Right? Y'all catch that? Yeah. All right, just make sure y'all with me. 4 little girls, this is Birmingham. Birmingham in the 1960s, especially 1963, was referred to as Bombingham, right? Because if you ever wanted to just kind of get people to cow down, then there was these threats of violence, particularly using bombs. And so these 4 little girls, Carol Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Eddie Mae Collins, and Carol Robertson, they were killed in September 1963. And so for all the hoopla we hear about the March on Washington and how glorious it was, and this is the new reckoning, a new day has come 18 days later. Right? Not even 3 weeks. Right? That kind of sounds familiar, don't it? Get a black president, all of a sudden, the killings of black folks just happen to go up in the public sphere. Anyway, so 1963, these are the 4 young ladies who lost their lives. There was actually 2 other people who were killed on that day, but these are the 4 young ladies who were killed in the church. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer was a sharecropper. And for folks who don't know what that is basically a reincarnation of enslavement. And so there are many black folks who did not leave the Deep South after emancipation. They basically continued to live on the land. And the basic tenet of sharecropping was that you could lease the land and your labor was going to pay for the land that you own. Right? And the goal, right, at least on paper or maybe even just in theory, was that you would, over time, become the owner of that land. So Fannie Lou Hamer is from Ruleville, Mississippi, and this is up in the Mississippi Delta. And she decided, after connecting with some folks, that she wanted to have the right to vote. Because she went to register to vote, I got 2 stories on this. The first one is, because she went to register to vote, the plantation owner kicked her and her family off the land. Right? So again, what form of freedom do you have if you don't even have agency over your own body and your own security in the household? Right? She was arrested, a little bit later, she was arrested for trying to help others get registered to vote, and she was beat so bad that she had a permanent limp for the rest of her life. And again, you see this quote, this notion of community, right? So we think about mothering, we think about this from a community standpoint, says nobody is free until all people are free. She created a food program in Ruleville, Mississippi to help feed some of the young people who suffer from undernutrition, malnutrition, et cetera. She was the co-founder and elected vice chair of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and this was started by 3 black women. And what they basically argued was that the traditional Democratic Party did not actually represent the people because it was only white folks in there. Right? If you look at the racial demographics in Mississippi in 1964, when this was founded, you would see that somewhere around 60% of the population was black. How do we have a Democratic Party that's supposed to be for the people and we can't even be represented in it? Right? And so she was co-founder of that. And she also was one of the key architects in the 1964 Freedom Summer Initiative. And it was kind of 2-pronged. The first part of it was 1963 because one of the arguments was that we don't need to extend black folks the opportunity to vote in Mississippi because if we do, they're not going to vote anyway. Right? That sound familiar? Right? We're going to exclude you by omission. Right? And so they did this ballot campaign in 1963 because they wanted to show that if given the opportunity that black folks would show up and vote. And then in 1964 was Freedom Summer, where they brought a bunch of people down to Jackson, Mississippi and all throughout the state in order to teach youth because the schools were not teaching them adequately. Victoria Jackson Gray, she's one of the other women that helped found the MFDP. She was actually the chair of it, served as a national board member for the SCLC, helped open freedom schools in Mississippi during Freedom Summer, and then again, kind of see these narratives of how women were active in these other organizations, whether it be SNCC, whether it be SCLC, whether it be CORE, Congress on Racial Equality. And so the movement is in me, and I know it always will be. And so she talked about how she was not only just doing this for herself, but she was doing it for others who were around her as well. Here's Amelia Boynton. She was on that image of the 4 women that I showed you. And another image that's very popular about Amelia Boynton, how many people saw that movie Selma? Anybody saw that movie? It's a good movie if you haven't seen it. And Selma is about Selma is about a lot of things. One of the things that it's about is the right to vote. And so Amelia Boynton in March of 1965 helped organize this march that was going to go from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. And this is also known as Bloody Sunday. Right? And this is when they were beat with billy clubs, ran over by some of the police horses, tear gassed, etc. And Amelia Boynton was one of the people that day who was victimized by police brutality. And she actually was laid out unconscious on the ground. And she was basically saved because some people kind of picked her up and moved her, otherwise she might have gotten trampled by horses. But again, you can see she's a key organizing figure in the SCLC. She was the first black woman to run for Congress in Alabama in 1964. And she also was the first black woman to be on the Democratic Party ticket. Kathleen Cleaver, so again, I talk about the Black Freedom Movement because if we talk about the Civil Rights Movement, sometimes it gets restricted and we leave out folks like the Black Panthers. Again, you gotta be careful of who's telling you the stories. So here's Kathleen Cleaver, and she began service in New York, SNCC office, later became famous for organizing the Free Huey campaign, worked full-time on the Eldridge Cleaver Defense Fund. That's his wife. Notice how I say they're his wife? She's not his husband, all right? Served as co-director of the Human Rights Research Fund. Shirley Chisholm, one of the best books I ever read. It's called Unbought and Unbossed. Shirley Chisholm was the first black woman to run for president in the 1970s, right? And here we can see her understanding of intersectionality. In the end, anti-black, anti-female, and all forms of discrimination are equivalent to the same thing, anti-humanism, right? Again, none of us are free if all of us ain't free, right? Active within the Democratic Party, member of the New York Assembly. She actually passed sponsored bills that would help poor students attend college, reverse gender discrimination, and she worked against on the behalf of prison reform. First black woman to serve in Congress in 1968. And you can see she was there for the course of 15 years almost, and co-founded the National Political Congress of Black Women in 1984. Barbara Jordan, first black female to serve as president pro tem of the state. She was in Texas. 1972, she was elected to Congress, first woman to represent Texas in the House. 76, first black woman to deliver a keynote address at the Democratic National Convention, right? And again, because black women have this unique situated standpoint, when we hear folks like Hillary Clinton talk about, women breaking through the glass ceiling, if you ain't even in the door, what ceiling are you busting, right? And so sometimes our versions of feminism, right, are very different depending on who you're talking to, right? So you read some Angela Davis, some Bell Hooks, some Audre Lorde, you'll get a very different representation and understanding of what kind of feminism is, especially from a black woman's perspective. And so, again, we talk about black women as agents of knowledge, right? Betty Shabazz, right? Bad sister right here, right? She's a professor in the CUNY colleges in New York, freedom fighter, activist, feminist, right? The list goes on and on. There's actually a school in Chicago named after her, the Betty Shabazz Charter School. And obviously we know her husband, right? Might have heard of him, Malcolm X, right? Might have heard of him. A few other women of the struggle, just a couple of pictures here. Charlene Hunter Galt, she was the first black woman to graduate from the University of Georgia in 1962. We have C. Dolores Tucker, highest ranking black woman, state government. Myrlie Evers Williams, her husband was Medgar Evers. Again, she was elected to the position of chairman of the National Board of Directors at NAACP. Just, a phenomenal woman. Here's a few just images of kind of civil rights activity, and I think it's just important to show. So large picture on the right here, this is just inside of a church. So when you start talking about organizing and who's showing up, right? If my eyes are not lying to me, like, all I see is women in that picture, with a few speckles of men, right? And so again, ways in which men are privileged because women are carrying much of the heavy load. We see some images here. That's Victoria Jackson Gray's headquarters there when she was running for the Democratic seat. And then here again, we have some women meeting. Here's a couple of images. This one is here, Danielle Bryant. So if you've heard of the Kent State University shooting, right? And this is an image. Daniela Bryant there talked about how she was really involved, didn't realize how dangerous things were. And so again, one of the narratives, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the narratives we heard is that we don't really want women to face some of the same challenges, right? But again, you've heard several instances of women being beaten, denigrated, diminished. And then here's the Leesburg Stockade. So they imprisoned these young black girls and they put them in a horse barn, right? There's no beds, there's no toilets, there's no sheets. They just got the walls, right? And this is a form of prison. Again, prison is not intended to rehabilitate folks, right? This is another form of institutionalized structural oppression, right, intended to divorce people from their families and disempower communities. A few more. Sandra Nixon, she's a freedom rider. Here's Betty Poole. She was very active at Arnell Ponder. She was in Greenwood, Mississippi with the SCLC. So again, I'm just giving you some images and faces of people who were at the forefront of the civil rights movement, the black freedom movement, all throughout the mid-20th century. Here's a picture of Fannie Lou Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer, Victoria Jackson Gray, Annie Devine. This is when they actually went to the Democratic Congress in 1964. This is the front steps of the U.S. Capitol. Here's another picture. That's Septima Clark, the woman with the glasses sitting in the middle. So this is just an image of her teaching these adult literacy classes. And of course, right, if you're going to have a king, you got to have a queen. Right? So this is Coretta Scott King. And just my argument, you ain't got to agree with me. We wouldn't even know MLK if it wasn't for Coretta Scott King. Right? So when we started talking about mothering the movement, I just wanted to take you from our forebears, our foremothers, right? Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, all the way up through Coretta Scott King, who in her own right was one of the baddest women that we know. She was the director of the Martin Luther King Center. She presided over the Martin Luther King papers at Morehouse University for a number of years. And her long-standing legacy cannot be undermined. Right? Here, I just leave you with a couple of images of some books. I got a couple of quotes here, Rosa Parks and Coretta Scott King. Again, my favorite, Coretta Scott King, freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. Sometimes folks ask, what can I do? You can get to work, right? You can get to work. There are people around you who are in need, right? And we have to take our opportunities to help them move forward. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop here. I wanna thank you all for having me out. I know some folks gotta go to class, but I wanna kind of give an opportunity for us to engage in some Q&A. So first and foremost, again, Highline College, thank you so much for having me out. Really appreciate it. And as I mentioned, I know there's some students who need to leave, and so we want to give pause so you can get to your classes. And then we're going to open it up for Q&A for students or anybody else in the audience who may have questions. We got microphones in the aisle that you can step to and ask your question, and I am very eager and ready to respond.
Is it possible that you can go back to the picture before Coretta Scott? Because I was like taking pictures of each slideshow that you were doing. Thank you.
Yes. Oh, you want somebody to sign that?
Oh, yeah.
people from the committee sitting right now. That's Aisha with the scarf right there. She can sign it. All right, the floor is open for questions.
Hi everyone, we're about to start the Q&A, so anyone interested in asking Dr. Broom some questions, we have 2 microphones, one over here and the other one right across from me. Thank y'all.
I'll kick it off.
All right.
Usually, I'm a faculty member here. My name is Helen. I'm in the math department.
All right, good to meet
Don't
you.
boo and hiss, please. I think one of the challenges in coming up with a question is kind of understanding how gender really plays out. I thought you made some great examples. Women leading from behind, who's taking care of the house and stuff. I was hoping, and I'm projecting here because I need some help us talk about communication as a sociologist. Women and men have different communication styles. Maybe you can link it even to respectability politics, because one of the things that's not okay is to get mad. And yet you work in a predominantly white institution, and so do I, and it's challenging to, so talk about communication and gender, maybe give us some advice.
So a couple of things. I'll answer that from the perspective of the presentation, and then I'll transition and talk about that within my own role in higher education. And so one of the things that we understand in relationships that we have both verbal and nonverbal communication, right? And so I'm thinking about like my grandmother, like when we was in church, and I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, and she just looked at me, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? And then if I didn't take the hint, she gave me that church bench, right? So one of the things that happens is that, number one, we can never not communicate. Everything we do is a form of communication, right? So that if you're talking to me, whether you're asking me a question or you're providing me with some information, and you're speaking to me in my eye contact, I'm over here, I'm kind of looking around, checking my watch, looking at my phone, what I'm communicating to you is I'm really not very interested in whatever it is that you're saying, right? And so for the first thing I want to point out is that we have to understand that everything that we do in an interaction setting, and I'm thinking about this primarily from a sociology standpoint, but also from a communication standpoint, is a form of communication. And one of the things that happens in a movement is that what women decided, right, what they decided was that I don't have to be in the front. We need to get free. And I'm willing to step to the side. I'm willing to step to the back. I'm willing to do some things on the backstage if that's going to help us. From a gender standpoint, unfortunately, many men are, again, I'm not talking about all, many men are driven by their egos. I want to be seen, I want to be heard, and I want people to know who I am. Like I said, just because you're talking loud doesn't mean you said anything, right? And so from a positioning standpoint, and a lot of this has to do with how we're socialized. When we think about young girls and the ways in which they are parented and guided, what we're doing is socializing them to be nurturers. We want you to be able to help other people. When we socialize young boys, we tell them, you go out and you lead. You get people to follow you, right? The best leaders are the people who are the best followers. Right? But we get confused about that, right? And so from a gendered standpoint, one of the things that we have to think about now, it's, the first part speaks really to like that civil rights movement. Again, as I mentioned, this is absolute agency. If I say, listen, I ain't got to be in the front. We need to be together. That, to me, is the greatest form of leadership, right? To do some self-sacrifice and compromise your own standing and your own kind of prowess so that we all can move forward. And unfortunately, too often, our egos, men's egos, get in the way because they want to be seen and heard, even when they're not saying anything, right? In the current time frame, one of the challenges that we face is that we're actually not even being taught how to communicate effectively. Right? So as I think about, the question that you asked with regards to maybe we might get mad, or as Rich Homie Quan says, I might feel some type of way about it, right? What happens is when people feel some type of way, they actually shut off communication, right? This could be a romantic relationship, this could be a brotherhood, this could be a friendship, this could be adult-student interaction, adult-youth interaction, and when we get mad, what we've been trained to do as acceptable behavior is, I just don't want to talk about it. And in fact, men are privileged in being silent in discussions. And so what happens is that over time, if I can make enough leeway with that, I'm gonna keep on doing it. Right? And then on the other side, there was this, one book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. Right? I don't necessarily believe in that, but what I do believe in the ways in which we support particular types of behavior from our youth. Right? And then it gets reaffirmed in school settings. Right? So in schools, in elementary schools, girls are allowed to be helpers. If boys try to help, they're called feminine, right? They're actually sanctioned and chastised for it, so they disengage in those behaviors. It's not because they don't want to, but they don't want to receive those negative sanctions. You move that into the high school setting, and I'm particularly thinking about I'll only speak about my own self. When you think about young black males, right? There are many ways in which we are hyper-visible and invisible at the same time. Right? And so we're hyper-visible when we're doing something that somebody considers as deviant or bad. We're hyper-visible when there's an athletic contest. Right? We're invisible when it comes to academic and intellectual might. Right? Like you good at football, you ain't got to worry about the test. Right? And so as we think about how those things happen over time, ways in which people parent, as I mentioned, my father was a father who, he didn't talk to us. It was just like, you better do what he said, because it wasn't no conversation. Right? He said, okay. And if you didn't do it, there were consequences. Like, it wasn't a talk, right? My mother would just, try to rationalize it. I'm like, come on, man, just, like, where are we going with this, right? And so there are ways in which we navigate towards those things. When we think about the institutions that we work in, there are, cultural codes for communication that comes from administrators on down, right? And so in many ways, as faculty members, as staff members, we're basically just kind of, on the hamster wheel, carrying out the institutional ethos for how communication ought to happen. But one of the other things that we know is that when people are in privileged positions in institutions, they have the power in their wheelhouse, so that if you're not agreeing to go along with how they're trying to do something, they'll just cut you out, right? And so one of the things that we talk about all the time is that we got to learn how to be in the game to be in the game, right? And so if you're trying to, effectively communicate with folks, one of the things you have to do is communicate in the styles they are privileging in how they want to be communicated to. Now, that might not be your comfort zone, that might not be your style, but if you're trying to get heard, you're going to have to deliver it in the ways that they want to hear it, right? And so there are power dynamics all in that, right? Some people will only communicate with you via email. Like, dude, my office is right next to yours, right? Some people will only talk to you in person and then they hide from you. Oh, shit, that's Derek. And so we got to navigate all of those things, right? Some of that is based on, I work at a large university, and we have a College of Arts and Sciences, right? So I have a Department of Sociology, and there's a College of Arts and Sciences, and then there's the university. So by the time communication comes from like our department, you don't even know what people are talking about. But I don't think that's an accident, right? Because part of the confusion is to lose things in the bureaucracy. Right? Because again, if you don't understand what I'm saying, then you can't challenge it either. Right? So there are ways in which people will invite us to the table and disinvite us from the table. So very often I'm not invited to the table. Because it's like, listen, if I'm here because I want to be working with students, and I understand that there were no students, I could not be a faculty member, so I'm here to represent students. And there are very many, many times where I've been invited to one thing and there's a follow-up meeting, and then I don't get any information about that. Right? And so we have to understand, that's really, that's not me not being good enough, that's other folks being uncomfortable with being challenged to do the things that we're supposed to do, right? And so that notion of holding people accountable, some folks, they don't want to be held accountable. Some folks are in positions just for the position and not for the students, right? And so we got to understand how, and this is the beauty of studying sociology, because one of the things we do is study people. We study people, how they interact. We study their modes of communication. We study effective communication. We study group dynamics. So, oh man, when this person gets with those two folks, I ain't talking to him. There ain't nothing happening today, right? So I got to talk to them on a one-on-one setting. And so we've got to, that's an everyday thing, right? We got to navigate and negotiate that on an everyday basis. Then when you start, and then there's just so many things. When you start thinking about how do we move forward. For instance, I'll give you an example, and then I'll open it up because I know other folks have questions. Just a real quick example. We had, I teach an honors class, Race in the United States. I taught it as an honors class. And what honors just means is that it's 25 students. My other class is 140 students. I don't really like that. Because I think that's warehouse schooling, right? You ain't educating folks in that kind of setting. But we have an honors dorm, and throughout the entire fall semester, going all the way till March, students were being racially harassed in the dorm, right? And I'm meeting with students. Students are pissed off. I'm looking for administrators. I can't find administrators. I'm emailing folks. Folks won't respond to my email. And some kind of way, because I think the students continue to reference me in their conversations with me, I get invited to this meeting with the VP of Diversity and the Dean of Students, and it was somebody else. And the short version of this story was just basically laughable, because what they basically came to the conclusion is we really can't do anything, right? So we have a meeting for you basically to say we can't do anything. And what you're also saying is that you're okay with students being racially harassed in the dorms on campus, right? And so what I left and they said we're going to meet again. That was the meeting I was referring to. There's actually been 2 meetings, and I haven't been invited to those. Because one of the things that I said to the VP of Diversity is I said, I'm real confused at how you're supposed to be the VP of Diversity, and our students have an issue with inclusion, and you're okay with them being harassed. Because to me, that's sanctimonious to basically saying you're not really here for the students. And then the response was, well, the students haven't told me those things. I said, listen, when I go to my class, I teach a lot of freshmen. I'll ask them one of the days, I say, anybody know who our VP for diversity is? And we have a VP for diversity? So if people don't know you, then you're not doing your job. And so that's a different kind of story, but my point is that there are ways in which some people want to confront the problem head on. There are other ways when people want to do the dance. Right? I'm just not interested in the dance. If you're going to dance, I can stay at home. Right? And so those are the ways in which we talk past each other. Those are ways in which all too often, because we're so focused on being heard that we're not willing to hear other people, so we talk at each other. Right? And less often we're talking with each other. So I think, again, all of those things. Okay? Other folks, yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Chancellor. I'm
Nice to meet
part
you.
of the Moja program.
Welcome, Umoja. Appreciate y'all for coming out. Appreciate y'all for coming out.
My question is about, well, first I'm going to lead to it. I see how you spoke greatly about these strong women, how these women came together. And I'm wondering, have you noticed in recent years with some reality shows, you got these women, black women that are against each other, and finding pleasure and getting revenge on one another, and it's like it's really sad to see that, because it's like why be like this and be mad at each other over stupid stuff when you can be united and help each other out, but instead you want to be envious of each other and and not help each other to succeed together. But they're like this, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And,
Okay.
And how that can change.
All right, so thank you for that question. The question was basically referring to this notion of reality TV, ways in which, in particular, I'm talking about these positive images and strong black women, and in some reality TV shows, which I actually refuse to watch personally, we have these images and representations of women who seem to be at each other's throat, combative, envious, et cetera, right? So when I was growing up, my grandmother, I lived with my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother, and she used to always call the television the idiot box. Right? And I remember one day we had a conversation, like, what does that mean? She said, they put things on television so you don't have to think, and in order for you to consume. And so you have to be careful of what you let into your eyes, because it can go into your mind and your heart, right? And so my running joke is that reality TV, first of all, ain't real, right? These are scripted, whether formally or informally, ways in which to produce drama to get people to watch again, because TV shows make money when people watch, right? I just think this is a refashion of Maury Popovich, like some of those, Judge Judy, some of those daytime shows where they just got folks on there with drama. It's just your baby daddy. Like, why are you? But here's a couple of things that's happening with that, right? We have to be very careful because people will want to represent to us the worst of us. And then they will use that to define us by those things, right? All too often, black folks are diminished, and this happens to, Latino and Hispanic folks too, black and brown folks. All too often, we are defined by the worst of us, not by the best of us. The best of us actually gets a pass as exceptional, and then they're considered not like the others, right? First of all, we can't allow other folks to disaggregate us, because if it's us, all of us, right? And it's just like our family. I come from a dysfunctional family. I got people in my family I don't want to talk to. If they walked in here right now, I hit them with the head nod, like, I don't want to talk to you. Right? And I'm saying that to say that I'm not judging folks, right? Like, I got issues too, right? Because I am who I am. I'm human, right? I'm imperfect. But one of the things that happens is that things that get put on TV, people want to replicate in real life. And that's the challenge, right? So one of the things, where is that coming from? One of the things I think about is hurt people, right? Because I'm hurting and unsatisfied with myself, then I want to make you unsatisfied with you. I don't like her dress. So I ain't ask you, right? But people are so free and willing to give their opinion because they want to feel important. And so unfortunately, what's serving as a cancer is this notion of self-centeredness that has invaded many of our communities, where we're willing to tear each other down as opposed to build each other up. And it's manifesting itself not only in our homes, but is allowed to grow and fester in our schools. And then as we become adults, we have perfected it, and so we continue it. And what ends up happening is that if you are, for instance, somebody who might be identified as a nerd, right, whatever that means to you, you don't go and hang out with the class clowns all day, right? Because at some point, they're going to stop you from being studious. They're going to say, man, you a lame, you a sucker, you a chump, I don't want to hang with you. And so what ends up happening is birds of a feather flock together. Misery loves company, right? People hang out with folks who are doing some of the same things that they're, for the most part, doing some of the same things that they're doing, right? And so if people are engaged in these ways of tearing each other down, they're going to keep on looking and searching for somebody else who's going to support them tearing each other down, right? And so one of the things that we have to do to resist that is to understand is that that's not who we are. One of the things that, one of my favorite books is Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. And one of the things that Carter G. Woodson said is that the Negro, obviously referring to black people at the time, the book was published in 1931, he said the Negro or black folks have been so thoroughly trained to go out of the back door that if the back door didn't exist, we carve one out and go out of it ourselves, right? And so we have to be careful with the ways in which we are even informed or attempted to be trained to see each other and then adopt the oppressor's language for each other. Right? And so there's just some ways in which we've got to resist the demeaning nature, the ways in which it, I think about it from, when I taught at 2 different high schools, and one of the things I would tell the young men that I taught is that you have 2 options. You can either tear each other down or you can build each other up. If you're tearing each other down, then you can't complain about what we don't have because you're part of the destruction. But if you're talking about us moving forward, then what are the ways in which you're going to speak some positivity in other people's lives and support them in the things that they're trying to accomplish? Right? It's like, this thing I tell folks, your friends are your friends. Your friends are people who want the best for you. They're not people that hate on you. Right? Haters are going to hate. Right? So you got folks who are your friends and they continuously trying to tear you down and tell you how good you're not. They really ain't your friend. Right? Like Sister Erykah Badu said, I pick my friends like I pick my fruit. You don't just go eat any fruit, right? fruit, beat it all up. You don't go like, yeah, that's the one. Like, you don't know. You leave that one alone. And you got to get better, right? And so we've got to do some more discernment around, what type of energy, spiritual energy, physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy do we want in our lives? Because all that stuff will weigh on us, and then we'll end up enacting it out on others. Unfortunately, we do that to our children, right? We do that to our family members. We do that to the friends, right? Because we reach out and lash out to people who are closest to us. So that's, just some of the challenges that we face. And I'm thinking about that from the work that I've done in some of the communities that I've worked in, where when we have low opinions of ourselves, we don't want other people to have a high opinion of themselves. Right? When you shine, we shine. I'm trying to help you get yours, because the other thing is, I know that if you can get it, I can get it too. You just showing me it's possible. I ain't mad because you got it first, because it ain't the only one. But unfortunately, we bought into that kind of capitalist, competitive mentality where I can't let this other person get it because then that means it's less for me. Right? We got to resist that, because I think that's another thing that's, stealing ourselves from ourselves. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You were talking about how, what I got from what you said was that this revolution that has been occurring since the Civil War, or not the Civil War, but civil rights, is about an individual change, not necessarily a political one. And from your standpoint, what should an individual do to direct themselves? Because I didn't want to ask you what should an individual do, because that's just following another dogma or somebody telling you what to do. Mm-hmm. So what should somebody do for themselves to reach their full potential and get the most out of this experience of life that we have?
Thank you for that. First of all, that's deep. Like, I don't. Right, this is hypothetical, if there was a right answer, I feel like if I get it right, I should go and like open up a store or something. Like, I trademark this. All right? First and foremost, thank you for your question. I really think that's an introspective question, one that is built and based on deep discernment and reflection on those questions such as who am I, right? And in Black communities and African-centered communities, we also ask whose am I, right? Or who do I belong to, right? So I would agree with you to an extent of individual change, separating that from political change. But again, if the politics are wrong, then we have to figure out ways in which we can help steer that right. Again, that's a formidable task, but it is something that is worth our effort. More specifically to your question with regards to what can an individual do, I think, for me, as I think about it, the first thing we have to do is know who we are, right? Again, I love music. I listen to tons of music. I watch a lot of movies. So I make those references a lot. I just quoted Erykah Badu because they're real to me. They're not just words, right? And so another line from Erykah Badu said, we got to get people to call us by our real names. Right? I think about that, right? I think about that. I can't get somebody to call me by my real name if I don't know who I am, right? So my name is Derek Rufus Brooms. My father's name is Rufus Brooms. And so every day, as long as I breathe, I got an opportunity to carry my father's name. And because I know that, because I know him to the extent that I know him, I'm not saying I know him in the ways that I know him, right? I understand what I do is not just reflective of me, it's reflective of my parents and their parents' parents and people in my life, friends and family, associates, et cetera. And so I'm not engaged in respectability because I think that's another control mechanism, right? What I am engaged in is saying the actions that I will engage in, the activities that I will engage in will bring honor and respect to my people. And so I'm just very intentional in the ways in which I engage in things, but a lot of that is rooted on studying, right? So when I say like knowing who I am, it's not a notion of this is what my name is, but what does it mean to be Derek Rufus Brooms and then to have 2/3 of my name, if I divide it like that, to be my father's name. And just by the way, I have an older brother and I have one of my younger brothers, their middle and last names are Rufus Brooms as well. So I don't even carry that, and I'm not like the only one that carries that. but I'm also not interested in how they carry theirs, because I can't control them. And so what I really try to focus on is, at all times, not compromising what I want most for what I want in the moment. Right? So there may be something that's right in front of me, and it might be fun, it might be cool, but if that's not really gonna help me get to where I'm trying to go, then I gotta learn how to like leave those shiny coins and shiny toys alone so that I can get to what it is that I'm trying to do. And so a lot of that is rooted in purposeness, or purposefulness, or purposeness, or you know what I'm saying? Right. I'm messing it up. And so I try to really reflect on, as much as of a daily basis as possible, but definitely on an ongoing basis, why am I here and why am I doing this? And that's not to suggest that I always have the answer to those questions. But even in the act of asking those questions, it can help me gain greater clarity on who I am and where I am at that time. And so I know that from a physical standpoint, there is this sense of liminality, right? I can't live forever, but I can live intentionally. And so the activities that I engage in, I just try to be very clear on why I'm doing it. If it doesn't line up with my values, I will thank people for the opportunity, and I might even suggest some other folks they might call. Right? But I'm not going to put my name on something that I don't believe in. Right? I've worked in high schools in Chicago. I mentioned I'm from Chicago. When I was in ninth grade in Chicago, we started with 332 students, my ninth grade class. When we graduated, it was 99. Over 2/3 of the people I started with were not even at the school anymore. And I knew that I didn't get to be a senior in high school because I was special. It was because of the choices, the chances, the circumstances, and the opportunities that had been provided to me. And what I understood was that my life was no different than somebody else's life. And that if I can take a step forward, then I also need to be reaching back to help somebody take a step forward as well. Because I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today if people didn't look out for me. I'm talking about even today. And so I think that we have to know who we are. We have to constantly give thanks and let people know that we appreciate them in the ways in which they have helped fill our lives, because tomorrow is not guaranteed. And so I try to be in the moment. I try to max out today, because tomorrow, I don't know. Today is, is a gift. It's a present. The present is a present, right? And I also try to be authentic. Like, so one thing I don't like phoniness. That's part of the reason why I don't mess with most of my family, right? People that say they love you, but they don't never call you. Like, you lost my number. My number been the same for 15 years, right? Oh man, sure miss you. Call me sometime. Call you. Why don't you call me? Like, if you miss me, right? And so I try to be very authentic, because at the end of the day, I have to be happy with myself. So I'm not out to try to make other people happy, but I am very concerned with bringing people positive energy whenever I'm around them, right? And so that's not to suggest that I'm in denial of the challenges that I face and the obstacles that I face. That's not to say that I'm just gonna forget about the challenges that are around me. It's just, what do I choose to focus on? And what I choose to focus on is being as positive as I can be and moving forward with the greatest integrity that I can. Right? Thank you. Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
You said that school is just having four walls and education is different.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at the Black historical history, how would you say that the majority of the African Americans are not involved significantly in Black politics to help change the standpoint view of that is currently going on?
Well, thank you for the question. The first part of that, the question is about the ways in which I made mention of the importance of education, and then with regards to how do I make sense of the lack of involvement or lack of engagement in the political arena. Is that right? So part of it is the way the politics were designed, first and foremost, were intended to exclude us, right? And so I think that there's some discernment that we have to do with regards to not only what role do politics play in our lives, but what ways can we try to create change in politics? And I think there are some ways in which some people are disheartened because they've not seen the critical change that they wanted to see, not only in their lifetime, but not even in their own communities, right? And as much as I can commend President Obama for all the things that he's done, I can also criticize him on some of the things that he's done, right? So when we look at the number of deportations, it's the highest ever under his presidency for people who, based on their immigration status. When we look at the drone attacks, they've increased dramatically under his watch. Guantanamo Bay is still not closed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so I think that we have to take a healthy look at the ways in which our political system has been engineered in order to continue to advantage certain folks and groups and disadvantage others. So whenever we can, for instance, do things like in 2000, just tell people their votes don't count. Whenever people can win the majority vote or the popular vote but don't win the election, I think that there are some ways in which people lose faith in the system that is allowed for these types of occurrences. When we look at the gerrymandering, the redistricting of different communities so that they can have a political base, based on political affiliation, I think people become very dissatisfied with that and they disengage. But again, the system isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do, which is to serve the behest of interests for those folks in those particular ways. And so as kind of, what we might call the everyday folk, what we have to do is continue to push against that kind of political machine to try to create change. And I argue at the same time, we got to try to create our own, right? And so when we think about the black electoral politics of the 1970s, when we see people like David Dinkins gets elected to mayor, some of the first black mayors that we had in the 1970s. Yes. Say it again? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I heard my name. I was like, oh, right? I was like, man, I heard somebody call my name. Right? I was in the zone. So when we hear, that political movement that we've made, right? There are people who said, I thought I would never see a black president elected in their lifetime, right? 2008, people were in tears, right? Because the machine worked from the standpoint of their voices were heard, their votes counted, and it was able to bring forward a candidate that they stood behind, right? But we also know that there are ways in which people's votes don't get counted, right? So if you get arrested, you get a felony offense, you can't vote, right? There are ways in which we were talking about this, in some districts, the polling places changed. So you wake up day of the election, you thought you had to go over here 2 blocks, and there's no even notification to tell you where you're supposed to go. And so there's these ways in which we get this misinformation. There's things that I've seen in the past where it would be very hard to tell. You could circle in a bubble, but you couldn't really tell who it was actually directed toward because the circles weren't aligned horizontally with the names. And so you think you're voting for this person, but you're actually not really sure. And so I'm just and all the technology that we have in this country, those are not accidents, right? This is intended to confuse people, to make people less engaged, so that if you don't show up, of course your vote can't count. So there are some things that are in place in our society to try to take people out of the political process, i.e. mass incarceration, right? There are some ways in which we're such a capitalist society, so it is very much class-based. So depending on what neighborhood you're in, you have greater access to information around politics. And then depending on, if you live in a different kind of neighborhood, you don't know what's going on, right? There are ways in which people, on page 96 of this 100-page bill, there's some stuff attached in there that none of us agree with. But because we're very prominent about wanting to get this particular service, we're willing to compromise and allow that to become a law or a practice or regulation. And so in some ways, that's the system. That's not anything new. That has been created when this political system was created. And so if we look at a city like Chicago, Chicago has suffered from, in Chicago, we actually call politics plantation politics. Because the politics in Chicago, thinking about it from the mayoral office and others, is intended to keep people in their places. And by places, it's second, third class citizenship, right? In neighborhoods that are under-resourced and economically disadvantaged or disinvested in from regards to resources. So these neighborhoods are not, destitute by accident. And when people see these things and they have an understanding of these things, and they say, what is the use of me getting involved when at the end of the day, we're going to end up with the same bag of sugar honey iced tea that we started out with. Right? And so I think that's some of it. Right? Some of it is just apathy. Some people think, from a national standpoint, our voices don't really count. It's electoral college. We've seen that happen 2 or 3 times in the last, 3 elections. Right? And so some of it is just the information that we receive and how we might be able to navigate that system.
That was the last question. Dr. Broom's got to eat and do some other stuff. So let's give him a round of applause.